Okay, good morning, everyone.
Good morning, Rabbi.
When we are, I guess, children usually, and we're learning about brachos, and we're taught what bracha you make on fruit, what bracha you make on vegetables, cake, bread. We're also taught about brachos for seeing or hearing different things. But one of the areas that is not really discussed, and unfortunately, not really a big area for learning in general, is the order of brachos. What takes precedence over what? If you have an orange or a cookie, what takes precedence? If you have different types of grain products, what takes precedence? If you have different types of fruits from Israel, not from Israel, and even within that, what takes precedence? Again, in brief, we follow the order of the Chumash, where it talks about chitos, sa'oros, or whatever the Chumash lists first. Wheat comes before oats, before rye, different things, technicalities. In days of yore, I can say that expression, it's a very overused expression, but years ago, when a father would interview a prospective chassan for his daughter, and they invited to the house, and they would put out a huge spread of all different types of fruits and cookies and cakes, and they would see which he took first, which bracha he would make first, to see if the guy was a lamdan or not. I mean, the easiest thing would be you say, give me a piece of bread and I'll wash, and solve the problems right there. But that wasn't the case. I raise this issue because among the categories of brachos that is not studied or known is under what circumstances do you get people together for a zimun, to say Rabbi Sign of Arech? What constitutes eating together to make a zimun? And under what circumstances may you or may you not use Shem Hashem if there's a minyan of people? So Rav Amital gave a shiur on this a number of years ago when he was still alive, about the obligation of zimun for people who eat standing up, which relates to this topic. And I mentioned it because we all go to weddings, we all go to dinners with a smorgasbord. So what are, if I can use the expression, what are hilchos smorgasbord? What are the halachos of brachos that you have to make at a smorgasbord? There's all different types of food out there, and you're also eating, in most cases, standing up. Now, in many places, there are tables to sit down at, but you're sitting down at these tables is only a temporary type of thing in most situations. What are the halachos concerning hilchos smorgasbord, if I will? Standing up, if you're standing up at a shmorg and you have two other people with you and you've washed, can you bench with a mezuman? But a better question is, should you wash at a smorgasbord? There are a number of catering halls, not too many, but when you go to a wedding, if you look carefully, you may find outside the wedding area for the smorgasbord a sink with bread, because in all probability, you should wash at a smorgasbord, because there are so many different types of foods that you will eat there. And there are so many different types of brachos that you may or may not know what takes precedence in making those brachos. To avoid the problem, you wash. But then the question is the entire event considered one meal?
Can you get through the meal in 72 minutes?
Well, if you're continuously eating,
Well, you have to take
yeah. At most weddings, that isn't a problem. At most weddings, people are eating continuously from the shmor. The only break might be if the rabbi speaks too long under the chuppah, if he speaks at all, that might be a hefsek, which adds another layer of questioning to the whole process. So the basic halacha for zimun and all these types of things is that you have to have something called kviyus. You have to establish some type of a permanent setting for your meal in order to bench together. If we have a shul dinner coming up, and it says this one's eating here, and this one's eating there, is that considered kviyus? We'll all eventually sit down at a table and bench, but before you wash even, is there any type of kviyus, of permanence established in this type of a setting? So we have to acknowledge two things. First of all, we have to acknowledge the way people ate in the time of the Mishnah and the Gemara is very different than the way we eat today. The Gemara in Brachos talks about the fact that if people are standing or if people are sitting, that does not establish kviyus for a meal. Because how did they used to eat? They used to eat on couches laying down. That's why we say kulanu misubim at the upcoming Seder, because that's how they ate. They ate at low couches, which was the Greco-Roman style of eating. And for many hundreds of years, that's how people ate. They didn't sit at tables with chairs. So if people were laying down on their side and eating together, then they could bench together and have a zimun, because that establishes kviyus. Now that's what the Gemara says. Unless you're laying down together and having a meal in that position where you can't have a zimun. You certainly can't say Devarech Elokeinu if you have 10 people. Tosfos already on the Gemara jumps in and says right away, wait a second, we don't eat that way anymore. We eat at a table and we sit down on chairs. So the halacha emerges from that if you're sitting at a table, then that establishes kviyus. That establishes the ability or the capacity to bench with a zimun.
Wally,
Now, yes.
if there are place cards and you sit at a certain table, is that considered a permanent place for you?
Yes. Anytime people sit down, again, in answer to your question, I'll give you a practical example. At yeshiva, for example, when I went to yeshiva, you had a dining room, and people would line up at the dining room, and people would take their food, and they would sit down at the table. And sometimes there'd be other people at that table, but you weren't part of the same group. Yes, everybody was having their own meal, but they could join together. If there were 3 people that would wash, then you would ask them, will you join us for a zimun? But before they could do that, they would have to have some, at least mizonos together with you to establish that connection in order to allow you to bench with a zimun. So just sitting together alone doesn't necessarily establish kviyus. You have to be eating together. So very often, if you will be, for example, it happens sometimes, you'll be at, let's say, at an amusement park. And there's 2 of you having a meal, and there's a third guy sitting on a bench, and you like to bench, so you invite, would you like to join us for benching? So the guy joins you, but he has to at least eat a little bit of mizonos with you in order to become part of your zimun is not for occasional people who get together. It's for people who establish this permanence through hamotzi, through bread, or at least mizonos, in addition to washing, to establish this kviyus. So unlike the Gemara where it was lying down, here it's sitting. Fast forward to our smorgasbord. If you're all standing around, and even if they have tables for you to stand and eat, does not establish kviyus to allow you to bench mezumin together. And most authorities would probably say no. Because standing around and eating and taking from here and taking from there, unless you've washed beforehand and agreed to eat together, then that would not establish kviyus. The recommendation would be that when you go to a dinner where there's a smorgasbord, you should wash beforehand, number one, to eliminate the problem of different types of brachos that you have to make, that you may not know the proper sequence and the order of making which brachos. For example, when you go to a shmorg, first of all, the whole question of things that are on pieces of bread. You have salmon on bread or meat on pieces of bread, or if they give you little hamburgers or hot dog, you have to wash. So if you wash beforehand, you avoid all the problems of the various brachos that you have to make. And also, the question is, should you bench before the chuppah or wait until the meal is over? Again, how much of a break between the shmorg and the sit-down dinner should there be in order to be continued one meal? And these are all serious halakhic questions. At the last wedding I went to, my granddaughter's wedding last week, I had this discussion with the rabbi, and there was no real clarity in terms of should we have benched?
Mazel tov.
Thank you. Should we have benched before the chuppah and washed again before the meal? Because you were in a different room. Again, you're all in one hall, but you're in a different room. Was kviyus established or not? And this is a big machlokas haposkim. In the end, we benched at the end of the meal, even though many people washed before the shmorg, because of the question of brachos, and it solves a lot of problems that way. But unfortunately, not every catering hall has that facility available. Yeah.
I'm assuming that if you have it in mind when you wash by the shmorg, that you're saying this is also going to be going on.
Right,
later.
correct. So in general, we would say that it's all part of one meal. It's a very extended meal. It's a, I don't know, not the word extended. Aside from being an extended meal, it's a meal divided in different parts. So you have the smorgasbord is like the entree, but it's all part of one meal. It's all part of one seudah, if you will. Yeah.
In the olden days, I don't know how much they do today, but going back 40 or 50 years ago, sometimes when someone made shepherd brachas, they didn't have a minion, so they would tell you, you know what, you eat in your house, you come to us with dessert, you have wine. When you come, that can be part of it.
Right. As long as you eat something with the people that are there.
In a different house. You do it in a different house, but you had in mind when you washed your meal in your own house, that I'm going to finish off the meal there.
So you raised a very important point. Intentionality, kavanah, to be part of the group is also important in terms of obligating you in the zimun and being part of the benching. But the halacha is very, very strong. Unless there's kviyus, unless you are part of a group intentionally, then you can't bench with a mezuman, nor if there's a minion, can you say Hashem's name. Now this comes up in practical, aside from weddings, what about people traveling? Let's assume we're all in a bus and we're taking a trip together. NATEP sponsors a trip to the Lower East Side. We're all on a bus together, and there's at least 10 people who have eaten. Can we bench mezuman after we've had lunch on a bus? It's not a simple question. Have we established kviyus? Now, since we are all sitting, is it technically considered like sitting at one table? The Gemara talks about people who are traveling. If you're traveling on a camel and you're part of a caravan, it's not so clear that you could bench with a mezuman because each camel is independent. If you're in a car or a van or something, it's an interesting question as to whether or not that establishes kviyus the same way as sitting at a table. You have poskim that are very machmir, and some that are a little bit more lenient. If people are walking while they're traveling, they definitely cannot bench with a mezuman. The Vilna Gaon writes that if you're sitting at one table, or if you're eating at a table, that might be acceptable for establishing kviyus, even though you may not necessarily have invited a person to eat with you. But the Shulchan Aruch, however, requires sitting together, because there's no kviyus without sitting together at a table. And if you're eating in a stationary vehicle, it has to be established in the beginning that you're all eating together. If you're in a car and everybody is facing in a different direction, there's no zimun, because even though you're in one vehicle, you're not necessarily eating together. If you're in a field, let's say you're on a field trip and people are outdoors, and if they're facing in different directions, there is no zimun, unless you say at the outset, "Come, let us eat together," to establish that kviyus, if you're sitting on the grass or what have you. But these are important halachos that sometimes people aren't careful about. As I said, Rav Amital gave a whole shiur on the obligation of zimun for people who eat while they're standing. If you're walking from place, let's say you're part of a tourist group, and you're walking from place to place and you're late, so you're eating on the run, there will be no zimun. If you, even though you're together as a group, but you're walking, but you're not sitting and you're not stopping to eat, so that would be a lack of kviyus. But the important thing here is that going forward, I would recommend that next time you go to a formal dinner and there is a smorgasbord before the dinner, that you wash before the shmorg for a number of reasons. It solves the issue of which brachos to make on what. And if you have in mind that this is all part of one elongated meal, assuming that the chuppah doesn't take too long or there aren't too many speeches in between, then you could bench at the end. If there's too much of a gap in between the shmorg and the dinner, you might have to bench before the actual dinner, because you have to be continuously eating in order to qualify for benching, not to mention the zimun part as well. But these are areas of halachos that really should be emphasized. When you're learning hilchos brachos, it's not just a question of what bracha you make on what food, but what the precedents for brachos are, what are the requirements for benching. And I said, I remember as a student, if a couple of guys would be sitting together at a table and we wanted to bench mezuman, we would invite somebody from another table to come over and join us, but make sure that he ate something first with us in order to establish that kviyus. But this clearly, the topic came for two reasons. Number one, being at a shmorg recently, but number two, Pesach is around the corner, and kulanu misubin, that's how they ate. That their meals were established lying on these low couches. It must have been very uncomfortable. I mean, they did it for centuries, but leaning on one side while you're eating is very uncomfortable. I mean, try it sometime. It's very uncomfortable. It's hard enough to do it at a Seder table, to lean on a chair with pillows. It's awkward to eat your matzah like this. It's very hard to do. But even if you were lying on a low couch, you're leaning on one side, and then the whole side will fall asleep after a while. I don't know how they did that.
Why?
And I must say, if you're leaning on your left side, it's okay if you're a righty. You can take what if you're a lefty? You have to. It's very difficult to do. Yes, Nathan.
What about if you're on LL? Do you bench with a meal? Do you ask people to bench with you, or are you considered a part of the group?
If all the people in your row on an airplane are part of one group, or you invite them to be part of your group, you could bench with a mezuman. You could, theoretically. Mm-hmm. If you had at least 3 seats across where everybody was eating together, and you establish that you're eating together, if you're a family or if you're a bunch of friends, or you could invite strangers. So theoretically, you could do that, even though there are some poskim who would say you couldn't bench with a bezumen while you're traveling. There are those who say that the airplane seat may not establish kvius the way you would at a dining room table. It might be a little bit different, even though you're sitting and you have a table in front of you. It's not the same as sitting at home at your own table or at someone else's table. So there are some poskim who would say that you shouldn't bench bezumen under those circumstances. But I would think if you have a family traveling together and you're all sitting together and eating together, there shouldn't be a problem mentioning bezumen. The only real question is, now, if you have a minyan of people in a group, whether you could say Nevarech Elokeinu in an airplane, that the poskim are not so clear on. And the whole other question of getting up to wash. I should mention parenthetically that there is no such thing as a mazonos roll. I'll say it again very clearly. There is no such thing as a mazonos roll that they will serve you with your kosher meal. It doesn't exist. It's hamotzi, it's not mazonos.
And how come some on those little pieces of paper that
It's
the super fruity kind of,
it's a
catering people say it's mazono?
because they're wrong. I can't say it clearer than that. Again, they're relying on a very flimsy technicality that if a roll or a pastry, for example, is made with fruit juice as opposed to water, so that technically it could pass as cake and not as, but it looks like bread, it tastes like bread, you're using it like bread, it's bread. Rabbi Moshe Feinstein was very clear about that, and many other posts agree. Again, will you find somebody to say that it's technically mazonos? Yeah. But by the same token, if you eat a box of Oreos, you have to bench. Even though it's mazonos. You still have to bench. Okay. Egg matzah is a big problem. Egg matzah, the only people who are allowed to eat egg matzah are people who are sick. Let me come to the first part first. On Pesach, the only people that can eat egg matzah are people who are sick or elderly who can't chew regular matzah. Egg matzah is very soft. Egg matzah during the year would probably be mazonos. As a matter of fact, Sfardim make mazonos on regular matzah all year long except for Pesach. It's a cracker. It's a cracker. But if you're using it as bread, as we do on Pesach, obviously we make hamotzi, but egg matzah during the year is technically would be mazonos. Now, if you're eating a lot of egg matzah and you're eating it like bread, you might be able to make hamotzi on it, but generally it's frowned upon. Egg matzah is technically cake.
And so why is the mazonos roll?
Mazonos roll, again, it's a kula of a kula of a kula. Put it that way. Again, most normative poskim would tell you that those fruit juice rolls are rolls and it's hamotzi. It looks like bread, you're using it like bread, you're eating it like bread, it's bread. And you're relying on a very, very weak technicality that they're kneading the flour with fruit juice as opposed to water. But you can go to Borough Park during the spring and summer, and you can get a hot dog on a mazonos roll because we're in the middle of the street. How are you going to go to wash? So they do it in Borough Park too. But it's, again, if you know the halachos and if you rely on traditional poskim but are not just looking for shortcuts, they would tell you that it's hamotzi. And again, a mizono, even its name, mizonos roll. If it's a roll, it's hamotzi. It's not mizonos. I mean, I'm not posking a halacha here, but ask your local Orthodox rabbi, and he'll probably tell you the same thing. Not a mizonos roll is not a mizonos roll, it's hamotzi. Sorry, I burst your bubble. Any other questions? Yes, Andy.
So when you mention the Zoom, what's the exact relationship? How are they saying that the Zoom versus the actual bench? Is there any relationship there?
No, I mean, benching you have to do whenever you eat bread. But when we have at least 3 people together, then you have an obligation
There seems to be somewhat of a relationship between the Zuman and the first bracha. It seems like even right after we say the Zuman, we start singing. Most people say the first bracha out loud.
Well, again, if you want to get into technicalities, the person who was leading the zimun should, in reality, recite the entire benching out loud until Al Yachasreinu. The custom has become the first paragraph out loud, but it really should be the entire benching should be out loud. If you're leading the benching, whether that goes back to a time before they had printed texts, that could be also. But zimun, when you have at least 3 people together, it's an opportunity to, praise Hashem for the bounty that He's given us. So that's why we have a zimun with 3. And if we have 10, you Shem Hashem. And if you have 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, there are different additions. I mean, I wonder if at the Siyum Hashas, if they served a meal, what kind of a zimun they would use. They have thousands and thousands of people. That's a special text.
Maybe that's it. Maybe there is a relationship. What is the first bracha in benching? In fact, it seems that it's kind of connected to this concept of zimun. What are we saying in the first bracha?
Is there a connection between the first paragraph more than the other paragraphs? Other than the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu is given credit for the first paragraph.
What's the first paragraph about?
Hashem provides food for us.
You think that's what you're saying? Zimun also now. That's what the...
Yeah, well, the zimun is basically praising Hashem for the food that we're going to bless Him for. Again, if possible, we should always try to eat with at least 3 people, if possible, in order to give us another opportunity to praise Hashem. But again, it should be the whole purpose of what we're talking about this morning is the obligation of zimun in order, or kviyus rather, in order to have zimun. And we should try whenever possible to include 2 other people when we eat. So in order to praise Hashem, an extra bracha. But again, when you're eating in a group, there has to be kviyus, and that's established by some type of either eating at the same table or inviting people to eat with you. And standing up is very problematic for benching. You can't bench standing up. And if you're at a smorgasbord, you should probably wash on your way in, because there are too many questions of which bracha comes first. And to avoid all those problems, you should probably wash before you go in. And now, as I said, not every catering hall provides that option for you. There are a few that outside the catering hall, there's a washing station and bread put out for you, because whoever the mashgiach is knows his business. But not every catering hall has that.
Wally,
Yes.
can you wash in the restroom and then come out and make the bracha?
Yes. You can wash in a restroom as long as you don't make the bracha in the restroom. Yes. Assuming there's a cup in there or some kind of clear. There are those on the very, very lenient spectrum who would allow you to use the faucet as turning it off and on. That's only bedochak. That's only if you have no cup available.
The rabbi talked about using, they asked the question, but using watermelon with the whole watermelon, except you have to fill it up with water, and you can use that to wash.
Well, that becomes a kli.
And he said no.
You can't use a watermelon for a clee?
No, you can't use it, because it has, the cleat has to have permanence. And I even asked Rabbi Greene afterwards to say, because I can do this, because I'm always in a hurry in the morning, I'll go inside, I'll take one of the paper cups.
Yeah, paper cup is not preferable.
But he said that the Evan.
B'di'evet, correct.
Better off using, because he said, for that candy, you need permanence.
Yeah, well,
It could be a plastic cup, but that's a permanent plastic cup, but
Yeah.
you can't use a plastic cup and you throw it in the garbage.
Yeah.
And this watermelon shell, basically, you're gonna ditch it as soon as you use it. You know?
correct. Yeah, that's a different type of kfiyus. But a washing cup should be a regular cup. It's the same thing is, and I'll just finish with this. The same thing is true, by the way, when you make kiddush. You shouldn't use a plastic, if possible, for kiddush or avdollah, you shouldn't use a plastic or a paper cup.
He also said from that Gemara is where I learned that pants to be reused.
Say again?
From that Gemara,
Yeah.
the watermelon,
Yeah,
is where I learned that you don't have to type on
aluminum pans, yeah, okay.
You can reuse them.
If it's reusable, yeah. There's a lot of interesting, technicalities in terms of what clee you could use, and plastic and disposable. What's disposable? Today, we live in a very disposable society, and even things that are permanent or could be permanent are thrown away. A lot of these paper or plastic plates that people use, they throw them away after one use. I mean, I know people used to wash plastic bags in the olden days and reuse them. But today, everything is thrown into the garbage. Okay, no other questions. Have a great day.
Thank you, Wally.
Okay, now we will bench with the Mezuzah.
I can't bench with you, can I?
That's a very interesting question.
Okay.
Okay, we have a Levi in the house. Go ahead. Yishem Adonai Baruch Mi'atov Yad Olam. Baruch Shechal Mishlot V'Chayinu. Baruch Atah Uno Sin Lech V'Chol Shakir Al-Pa'um Tevot. Tiv Lachol V'Chin Mazon Kol V'Yosov Asher Baruch Baruch Atah Olam. Amen. Yerushalayim Merakosh Merav Yameinu B'Machator Yirei Beracham Lo Yerushalayim. Thank you.
Mhm. Over it, so you don't have to